Good
Welcome.
morning. Oh, Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our Elsewhen webinar, Redesigning Government, 5 Principles for Agentic AI in the Public Sector. Before we kick off, just a quick introduction from me. So my name's Gabriel. I'm a researcher here at Elsewhen. I have a bunch of experience delivering multi-method research across financial services, the media industry, and the public sector. In particular, I've spent a lot of the last 6 months researching what AI means to the public sector, and specifically for this presentation, what agentic AI might look like and mean in the public sector. So that's me. Now just a bit of scene setting and housekeeping before I hand over to Nadav for the first part of the webinar. We're going to be talking for about 25-30 minutes today. We're obviously going to talk about agentic AI, which is obviously a big buzzword at the moment, but really talking about how they could become a more significant part of public services, and exactly what you as attendees can do to make better decisions when designing agents or experimenting towards building them. So yeah, specifically hang around for a live demonstration at the end of our new framework. And we've also built an interactive workshop that we will run you through that you could do with your team right now, tomorrow, next week. We will have some time for questions. As always, please feel free to pop any questions in the live chat on LinkedIn. We'll keep an eye on them and come back to the questions at the end. Without further ado, I will hand over to Nadav.
Thanks, Gaba. Such good energy for an 11 o'clock webinar. Hi, everyone. Nadav Mordechai. I'm Product and Strategy Director at Elsewhen, and with about 15 years of experience driving innovation and growth across different industries. Quick word about Elsewhen and who we are. Elsewhen is a digital consultancy, and we help organizations become the most effective and productive version of themselves. There's about 150 team members on our team with an average of 12 years of experience. And together, we've delivered well over 200 client engagements. Some of our clients would include the likes of Spotify, Google, or MasterCard. We're also Google partners and been growing quite rapidly. In fact, Elsewhen's been selected one of the UK's top management consultancies, as well as one of Europe's fastest growing company for the second year running. So we are a small but very mighty team, working across different industries. But like Gaba said, today we're going to be talking AI, and in particular, agentic AI. And so to frame that conversation, I want to start with the question, or kind of set the foundation for what we mean by agentic AI when we use that frames, right? So you would find different definitions across the web and potentially different talks you might have been listening to. And I want to choose, or I've chosen 2 definitions to begin with. The first one, which is very relevant in the context of the public sector, is a definition shared by GDS. And GDS talk about agentic AI as AI systems composed of agents that behave and interact autonomously to achieve their objectives. The other definition is actually from NVIDIA. It's taken from the NVIDIA blog. They add a bit more depth on that previous definition. And they see agentic AI as two systems that use sophisticated reasoning and iterative planning to, again, autonomously solve complex and multi-step problems. So we're moving here and kind of we're looking across these 2 definitions, and I want to really call out a few elements of agentic systems. So when we think about agentic systems, we've noticed through those 2 definitions that they are powered by generative AI or LLMs. They also have and we saw that word repeating in both definitions. They have a very strong autonomous aspect to them, right? So they operate as autonomous entities, and they interact with the environment, right? So that entity is interacting as part of a larger system. And part of what it does within that system is that it collates feedback from its interaction. So it learns and it gets better over time. And they use that knowledge and feedback that's been gathered throughout to make decisions that help the agents to achieve their goals. So this is quite a big leap from those simple, quote unquote, AI tools that we all use. So the likes of ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, where they act as sort of personal AI assistants. We use them to enhance our individual productivity. Now, when we think about agents, we move from that space of personal productivity into asking how we can automate complex organizational processes. So that's an entirely different set of tools and models that really helps us think not just on the individual sitting at the desk, but how the organization operates as a whole, right? And so we're moving here from the relatively narrow space of employee efficiency into the much larger space of enterprise productivity. And within Elsewhen, we've been very, very much busy thinking about that issue of enterprise productivity and how we enhance productivity over time, using all sorts of different traditional methods, as well as more advanced tools like Agentic AI. Now, there's a big question here, and that's the question of how we take that into the public sector, right? And so for the public sector, Agentic AI is not just about doing the same work faster. It really is an opportunity, I think, to become a lot more human and think about better interactions with the public. So how public servants can effectively understand public opinions quicker and better, how they can help different groups with their needs. It also helps government to become more responsive, right? So data really is becoming a lot more accessible. We can use insight to inform policy again and shorten cycle times between insight generation to how that's being used. We can use the model to share more behavioral predictions. And we can also use that to become a lot more productive, right? So if we think about those repeatable procedures that could become a lot cheaper and deliver better outcomes for example, tax investigations or all sorts of procurement processes, and we're going to talk about procurement processes in a second. All those things could become really a major change to how governments work. Specifically within the UK public sector, or kind of within the UK context, we see that there is higher appetite, or kind of there's a good framework the government provides, so a lot of appetite to get the public sector to start benefiting from Agentic AI. So we've seen over the last 12 months or so AI guidance frameworks that's been shared by government, by GDS. And there is strong appetite from government buyers or kind of government bodies to start experimenting with AI. So we've seen that over 90% of public sector organizations are really planning to explore or to pilot or implement some sort of agentic AI within their organizations within the next 2 or 3 years. And so this is all good as, I guess, theory. But as Gaba hinted at the start of this conversation, we tend to be very practical. And I want to take all of that theory and kind of go a bit deeper and talk about a real use case. So in that use case, I touched about procurement a minute ago. If you've ever procured any service from external suppliers, you would probably have spent weeks crafting your tender documents, receiving responses, ranking them, creating the right tender packs. It takes time, and I imagine anyone on the call today that is working for a government body would be able to sympathize with that pain. The other reason I chose that use case is that we actually have data to back this up, and we know that on average there is a 2.5 months delay in awarding of almost half of the UK public contracts, right? So this data is from 2023. When I've shared that before, we don't think there's a good reason to think that has changed, right? So there are significant delays, and they are in many ways quite justified, right? If we take the process that procurement officers or procurement teams have to go through when they come to evaluate a tender, any submission, it's not a quick process, right? There's multiple steps. So we think here again around things like creating scoring metrics and reviewing different responses and doing an initial sift of those responses. And then from those proposals that have made it to the next step, we need to go through a deeper review of each proposal, score them individually, often by more than just one team member, only for them to then be able to be compared against each other and aggregated in a way that helps decision makers to make a call on which suppliers they would like to progress with, right? So the process here is inherently complex, and with that in mind, we want to take AI agents and start using those AI agents to delegate large proportion of that work. So I'm not imagining the entire process end-to-end being replaced by agents, but what we do imagine here is a world, and I'll show how we built it in a second, is a world where AI agents are speeding up big parts of that process. So in order to do that, let's look at top-level architecture for a moment. So this isn't a technical session, and so I'm going to keep the architecture chat to a fairly high level, but I do want to call out some of the key components of an agentic architecture. We'll go left to right here. All right, so the first type of agents within that architecture are what we call orchestration agents. So these are agents that are purely designed to coordinate and direct the system and ensure that the right work is being delivered to and back from the specialized worker agents, right? So they need to understand the scope of the work. They need to understand which of the agents is best suited to tackle each task, and they delegate those tasks. Now, tasks are being delegated to what we call here worker agents. So worker agents, if you like, these are your procurement officers, right? The experts in doing one thing. But because procurement officers have been building their experience over time, these worker agents are split into smaller parts of the procurement process, right? So one worker, and we'll see that again in a second, would be responsible for creating the evaluation criteria. Another one would evaluate the tenders. Another one will create the scoring. These are highly specialized workers, if you like, knowing how to do fairly complex tasks. But because of the fact that we sit as part of a broader ecosystem, we also have supervisor agents. And now the supervisor agents, they need to check the output for quality. They need to check that there aren't any baked biases into the process. They are looking for consistency across the output. And they look at the entire process, making sure that things are working according to plan, right? And that the results are being delivered at the high level, or the level that we kind of set the system to deliver. Across all of those things, we have that human in the loop. And again, I said at the start of this that we're not looking to replace the human, but we're looking to speed up the processes. So in that example, all of these processes are transparent to the experts. They're transparent to the individuals that are responsible for the overarching process. So if we take those different components and we start placing them as an architecture or a bit of a flow, we can look here at that commercial team, and they interact with a bit of a user interface. It often is a fairly simple user interface. It will allow them to do some basic tasks like adding up or kind of uploading some of the tender documents or whatever data set they need to build for that evaluation. And then from that on, the next phase, the next step with it would be to start engaging the agents, right? So the first agent that comes into play here is that orchestrator agent. So they manage the tasks. They delegate the different tasks to different specialized agents, like we said. Then the worker agents, the specialists are coming into action themselves, and they do, again, specific tasks. One of them is building the framework. Another agent would potentially start scoring. Another agent is summarizing copy. And then we have the next layer, which were supervising agents, and they create a whole process of reflection and checking for biases and checking for consistency within that ecosystem. Now, I want to take a minute or two and try and put that into an actual example. So let's take everything that we talked about. We take that evaluation process and the different agents. And what's on screen here is a real example from a tool that we built. That tool is evaluating different contracts against each other. So again, it's a classic RFP situation where we upload content document, we upload the ITT or the RFP, we upload the responses. You have seen this before. The agent creates a set of criteria, and now there's been an evaluation. So that evaluation in that example is between two different suppliers across a set of different criteria. So the first supplier has got 4 or 5 stars on some of the criteria. Others have got 2 or 3 stars. There's some differences between them. We can see here the human uploading the documents. Evaluation criteria has been generated. Now the agents are thinking and they evaluate the process, they evaluate the documents. They describe what they do, and that is the report. So each of those scoring comes with a bit of commentary. That is the explanation of why any score has been given. So this is a real product, right? And that's something that we've built for one of our clients, especially again in that space. And so with all of that in mind, and we promised at the start of this that we're going to equip you with a clear framework to evaluate these opportunities. I want to say that there could be different opportunities, and across your different departments, you might come across different opportunities, different organizational pressures to pursue one opportunity over the other. And so the framework that we've designed, and Gaba is going to talk about it in a second, really breaks that down into much more manageable chunks and a step-by-step framework to think about those different opportunities. So when you make the decision, when your department is ready to make that investment decision, you have already considered different options, and there's a way to justify why one opportunity is more suitable than another. So with that in mind, Gab, I'm going to hand it over back to you. I think you're going to talk through some of the steps.
I think I've magically been unmuted. Amazing. So yeah, I think thanks, Nadav. That was great. And I think, as you just said, all of this stuff is really interesting. Some people on the call might have a big headache from it potentially, but I think the really big question that you've just posed is like the so what and where should we begin? So like you said, we've developed a framework. The framework's grounded in some of our research, but also our real world experience of implementing AI with our clients, like that example you just showed. And we've developed what we've called the trial framework to help organizations identify where agentic AI opportunities can create the most value in public sector organizations, but it also spans outside public sector as well. So the trial framework is made up of 5 guiding principles. Those form the word trial, with which we can use to evaluate agentic AI opportunities. So essentially what we're doing is we're qualifying agentic AI opportunities, whether they're customer journeys, whether they're internal processes and individual tasks, based on whether they are tedious, whether they are repetitive, whether they're inefficient, whether they have accessible data, and whether they are low risk. So I'll dive into sort of those 5 principles in a bit more detail now. So firstly, tedious work is a good candidate for agentic AI. Since the sort of advent of generative AI, there's been a lot of talk around how knowledge work is full of low value admin tasks like form filling, scheduling, logging, reconciliation. And, a lot of it is around the tasks wasting time. But I think one of the other elements of this is that these tasks create friction for employees. They waste a lot of human potential and value, and they often undermine morale. They really drive down employee experience. There's a lot of research, I think, from the Alan Turing Institute, which shows that employees actually actively want to hand off many of these tasks to AI. So here, when we think about kind of agentic AI, it's not about replacing people. It's about thinking about processes, workflows that remove drag and those unwanted tasks from employees' day-to-day processes. So that's the first tedious. Secondly, we want to look for repetitive tasks. So again, we know public sector organizations are full of processes that happen often and follow the same structure, procurement being one that we've covered today. And this is really where agents thrive. So repetition isn't the problem, it's the opportunity. So we like to say if something's boringly predictable, it can probably be agentic. Thirdly, focus on inefficient tasks. Not every process is broken, but when work drags across weeks or departments, the cost compounds and it drags the whole system down. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar. So here, agentic AI can remove those hidden sinks. We want to accelerate routine processes, workflows, so teams can focus on those higher value decisions. And that kind of links back to that kind of first principle around tedious work as well. Fourthly, we want to focus on tasks, processes, workflows. Sorry, I've said that word a lot, where there is accessible data. Ultimately, no data, no agent. That's kind of simply, but also when thinking about accuracy, accountability, scalability, agents need to be grounded in lots of good real data. That helps mitigate hallucinations, which everyone's obviously very aware of. So that's one element. And so when we think about an opportunity that we might want to apply agentic AI to, agents work. For agents to work effectively, they need structured inputs like fields, records, templates, APIs. And specifically around structured data, I mentioned this because one of the good things around LLM is its ability to ingest unstructured data, of course. But, whilst this can be transformed into usable formats, it's a much harder place to start when we're exploring agentic AI. So our advice would be start where there is accessible structured data before exploring more complicated applications of agentic AI. And finally, low risk. When it comes to AI generally, not everything should be automated. Everyone's very aware of this. We mentioned the human in the loop framework. But what we would say is when stakes are lower, when there is maybe no sensitive data, there's no high consequences for mistakes, you've got a great candidate for a pilot or experimentation. And then when we talk about these experiments, we're not going for perfection. You saw that product we built for a client. It's not perfect, but it's a safe to try area. And from that experiment, we can learn a lot. We learn fast. We document what went well, and we document what didn't go so well. So then we can scale more intelligently across teams, departments, and maybe to higher risk areas. So that's the final one. And that's how it all comes together under the trial framework. Tedious, repetitive, inefficient, accessible data, and low risk. And as I mentioned earlier, we always like to give you something to take away from this session, maybe something that you might want to do tomorrow. So we've turned this workshop, this framework, into a workshop. And if you scan that QR code, you can get access to it, but hold fire because I'm actually going to show you what this looks like. So we've published this workshop on Figma, which for those who don't know, is a design tool, but it also has something called FigJam, which is an interactive whiteboard tool, a little bit like Miro if you've used that before. And if I can kindly ask maybe Nadav or Yafa to pop this link in the channel as well. But if you click on that link, you'll land here. From here, we can actually go into the workshop. So by clicking on Open in FigJam, I can then open up the workshop board here. So this is what you're met with when you go in. We've tried to design something quite simple that doesn't overcomplicate things. It's 3 steps, and kind of by the end of it, you should be able to maybe come out with 2 or 3 opportunities that you've identified that could be interesting for exploring an agentic opportunity. So let me take you through what this might look like. So firstly, the first exercise is around the trial framework. So we want anyone who's participating, let's say you're doing this with your team, to understand what we mean by the trial framework. It's got a bit of an explainer around what its aim is for and what the principles actually are. Secondly, the next activity is around inspiration. So we always like to get those sort of creative juices flowing. And we want to start by adding some inspiration or examples that we've seen elsewhere in the public sector, or maybe, when we're struggling in sort of getting that creativeness going, we might want to ask, something like, if you had a magic wand and could make one thing better in your role, what would it be? So I've kind of pre-filled this Blue Peter style here, and kind of added maybe something that I would add here, which is like, when we were recently at DigiGov, an event, we learned a lot about the Consult product that's been released by the incubator for AI. I also added something here around the sort of Estonian government, which is one of the kind of most digital governments in the world and has a lot of implementations of AI, and they're exploring agentic AI. I could also add Singapore here as well as an example that I might want to look at and explore more. And then finally, we're into the main sort of task of the workshop, and that's really to focus on a workflow process task that we struggle with, that's tedious, there's any of those principles, and start qualifying it based on those principles. So again, I've preloaded this here with the example that Dav mentioned. So this example here is, our procurement takes too long. It's a repetitive, time-consuming process that demands consistency and is often slowed by incomplete information or human bias. We want to explore whether an agent could generate first-pass assessments, allowing teams to focus on exceptions, insights, and strategic decisions. The eagle-eyed among you might suggest that is AI generated. No comment from me. But the task here is really around, once we've put this down, we want to use these sliders here. So we basically rank this problem that we have on the principles from the trial framework. So when we think about procurement, is it a strategic or is it a tedious task and process? I think we know a lot of people here probably find it quite tedious. Whether it's rare or repetitive, some departments in the public sector are running large procurement activities consistently. Efficient or inefficient? Well, Nadav's stat shows us that it's a highly inefficient process. Messy data, available data. Well, some organizations, some departments might have hundreds, thousands of ITT responses, but maybe it's not that available because it's stuck in PDFs. So it's maybe sits there. And high risk and low risk. It's probably not very low risk, but it probably sits towards the right hand side of that slider. There's probably some commercially sensitive information in there. Some work might have to be done to anonymize some of that data. And so once we've done this activity of putting the sliders over, generally speaking, if we see dots towards the right hand side of these sliders, we think you're onto something. So that might be an opportunity to take that problem or opportunity, depends how you see it, into another conversation with your team, with your IT team, and say, how can we start experimenting around this? And here's the justification for it. Alternatively, that's something that us at Elsewhen are well versed in, and something that we could definitely help organizations or individuals do. So that's the workshop. If you find this a bit scary, there's guidance and advice throughout. So I'd encourage you to get stuck in, take your team through it. It can be a very valuable activity. So I'm coming back to the slides and time for any questions. I think there's a couple questions in the comments. One question, Nadav, is, do these agents have to exist separately for technical reasons, or is it that we have separated the human roles that did these, so it makes sense to create separate agents?
It's a good question. I could see it coming. Thanks, Carla, for that question. I would probably say we've not separated the human roles, but we have separated the human activities, right? So we've looked at the process, and as part of that, designing that agent, we engaged with one or two procurement departments, and we tried to really unpack the process, right? And so what was important here is how the process is structured and where there might be challenges within that process rather than exactly which role titles are performing them, right? So not so much the human roles, but the different tasks that are involved in there.
Yeah, there's probably an element there around, if you make the task smaller for an agent, it's more accurate. It's likely to give a better outcome. So you can have a more targeted approach for that agent to be more accurate. There's also a question also from Carla around, do we mean complex processes or complicated processes?
I think complex. I mean, I'm guessing that is referring to that NVIDIA definition where we talk about sophisticated reasoning to solve complex multi-step problems. I think that's the key there. It's that pair of words where we talk about complex and multi-steps. It doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated. Yeah. But you have anything to add on that?
Nope, I don't think so.
I think complex, not necessarily complicated.
Nice. Not sure if there's any more questions. So we maybe can wrap up slightly earlier, unless there's anything else from you, Nadav.
It was quite fun hosting that morning with you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I'm sure we will send out some a recording, links to various workshops, white papers. And if you want to get in touch, reach out to myself or Nadav on LinkedIn or wherever, and we'll be happy to chat. So thanks very much, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining.